26 years ago, Joyce Maynard burst onto the public consciousness. She wrote an essay for the New York Times Magazine titled An 18-Year-Old Looks Back on Life. It brought her mailbags full of letters, but there was one in particular that changed her life. The author, J.D. Salinger. Their relationship lasted less than a year, but its impact on her was tremendous. Although she has written about most of the major events in her life, she has so far refused to talk about J.D. Salinger. But in her latest book, she looks back on her entire life and includes the time she spent with the famous reclusive author. It is a memoir entitled At Home in the World, and I am pleased to have her back at this table. Welcome back.
Oh, it's good to be here.
Now, do I get credit, as you just said,
Yes.
for this book?
I try to do what
to
people...
follow my advice.
Yes, always. I do everything that people tell me to do. Last time I was on this show, you said I should write a book about my life.
And you did.
I went right home and started typing.
Why did it take so long? Why now?
Well, actually, there were a few other reasons. After I was sent away, dispatched from the home of J.D. Salinger when I was 19 years old, the world was... there was no place for me. I could hardly go back to college. My year with Salinger had left me with a feeling of a lot of alienation from the things that I had once loved and cared about. I could no longer pursue the dream of going to New York and publishing and having as the sort of career life that I had once envisioned for myself. And I carried with me for a lot of years the sense of failure that I was no longer worthy of this man's approval, but neither could I embrace the world that I returned to completely. So what I did with this experience was to put it away. It was too painful, really, and I carried on with my life. The story that I tell of the years since is not one of wandering aimlessly through life. I married, I had children, I worked, I wrote books, but I carried also this sense of obligation to maintain to protect the secrets and the privacy of this man who had not, I think, protected me particularly, until my own daughter turned 18. And if I was unable to recognize my own, the things that I might have deserved for myself when I looked at Audrey 2 years ago, when she was the age that I was, when I first left the world to be with Jerry Salinger, I saw the experience very differently, and I no longer felt that my primary obligation was to protect his secrets.
Okay, let me understand. One is that the obligation you felt was not because of the pain. The reason you did not tell the story was not so much because of the pain you felt from the rejection in the end. It was more a real respect for him and his passion for privacy.
Yes, and an adherence to the set of rules that had been handed down to me, which were very powerful. I say in my book at one point, and it's really true, that Jerry Salinger, J.D. Salinger, was the closest thing I ever had to a religion. And
a religion?
A religion, yes.
What are you talking about?
This was a man with an extraordinary emotional power. He came into my life at a moment when I was enormously vulnerable to that. You know, there's no telling of the story of my time with Salinger without first telling the story of the family that I came from, which is a big part of my book. I'd been raised in an alcoholic household where we never could speak of my father's drinking. I felt very outside of the world, outside of normal, what I perceived as normal American life based on watching television, crazily enough. And along come these letters, these amazing letters, written in the same voice, you know, that captivated millions of readers.
Holden speaks.
It was Holden. It was Holden Caulfield writing just to me to say, you and me, we're in this together. You are like me.
How did he know that? Just because he read something you'd written in the New York Times Magazine?
He read an article that I'd written in the New York Times, and what he said to me, what he said, and what was the truth of what his connection was, is a little hard to separate. But what he said to me was that he recognized in me a young and talented writer like himself once long ago, and that we were landsmen, a Yiddish word meaning, from the same town in the old country. And that was a very powerful thing to hear for me, who was this sort of outsider girl.
18-year-old Yale freshman
Yep.
and a legendary American literary figure.
Yes. And so my first attachment to him was really not, it was not, I didn't ever perceive it as a sexual, romantic thing. It was this extraordinary kinship, this friendship. I had never had a relationship with a man. I didn't really know how that worked. I just knew that I felt more connected to this person than anybody I ever had in my life.
So how did it become something else?
Well, I corresponded with him, and it was an intense correspondence through all of the spring of my one and only year at college at Yale. And when college got out, it was unthinkable not to go and see this person that had become the center of my universe. Classes, everything else fell away. And so I got a ride. I came from New Hampshire. I lived in New Hampshire, and when I went back home to my parents' house, I first sewed a dress with my mother for my visit.
Not the first time she'd done that.
No, not the first time. My mother always called clothes costumes, and the costume she sewed for me was a rather strange one. It was a very childlike dress, and I was a very childlike 18-year-old.
So
we
with
sewed
your
this
dress, you
little
go to see J.D.
alphabet
Salinger.
print shift, and I get a ride up to Hanover, and he picks me up on the steps of the Hanover Inn and takes me away to his house. And I remember feeling, even in the car, I don't ever want to leave this place.
Why? Just because... What?
Oh, I felt home. It was a strange thing. And I wasn't entirely wrong. I mean, this was a funny, wise, interesting man who told me all the things that, I would most wanted to hear at that
We're
stage.
soulmates.
Yes, yes. And in fact, that summer, I had been, as a result of this first article in the New York Times, I'd been offered a kind of dream job. I was given, it's now sort of ludicrous to say, I was offered a job as a substitute editorial writer for the New York Times. A newspaper that I had never read, but suddenly I'm writing editorials. And separate from that, a reader of my article had offered me their house on Central Park West to house sit for the summer. So I was going to be living on Central Park West, working at the New York Times. But I really lost, and it was everything that I'd always thought I wanted for myself, to get out of small-town New Hampshire and hit the big city. But now even as I was just getting that, Jerry Salinger was really taking me away from it. I mean, I won't ascribe some sort of blame. I was captivated by this person, and I quit my job, found another house sitter for the house, withdrew from Yale, and moved in with him.
What do you think he wanted?
I have really tried in the telling of this story not to presume to speak for Salinger. It would be very interesting to hear what he'd have to say, but that's not really my place.
I would very much like to ask him.
So I won't say. All I could do really was tell my story.
Okay, but tell me what you think. I mean, don't speak for him. Tell me what you think he wanted.
I think this was a man who longed to recapture innocence. That's what I think. And I think reading now the work of Salinger, which I really had not been significant to me at the time that I met him, the stories are full of it. The characters who are the most entrancing and the ones about whom he writes with most tenderness and just affection, extraordinary affection, are young, pure, innocent characters. And I was probably I most represented that for him before he even met me. And from the moment that I became part of his world, I ceased to be sufficiently that person anymore. It's impossible to maintain that.
Innocence.
Yes.
And how much of it had to do with what you and others who write about it? You were so very different. You, on the one hand, came even into this relationship wanting something outside. Even though you were drawn inside, you wanted something outside, and he wanted nothing outside. He wanted all inside.
No, it's, if you're going to believe in the concept of karma, it's a very interesting pairing to consider, that there was this man who who had attained, probably more worldly success in the world of New York publishing than any other figure of his time, and he had abandoned it to go off to a tiny little town in New Hampshire, the very year that I was born, in a little town in New Hampshire, with a burning ambition to get to New York City. And of all the 18-year-old girls that he might have sought out in the spring of 1972, he chose one who had already identified herself as not only a writer, but a writer about herself, and an observer, and a reporter.
What is he about?
What is he about? Once again, I think it would be presumptuous for me to, this book that I've written is many things, but I did not write a Salinger biography.
I know, but you got to understand the appeal of this, as you know, is the fact that you've had this rare, unique experience with one of America's great literary figures.
Yes. I think there is an enormous, to say that he guards his privacy and seclusion is only half of the story, because this is also a man with a deep interest in what's going on in the world, a man who's may very well be watching this program at this very moment. He's always watching what's going on, and I think he saw in me, I won't say what he saw in me, but who I was somebody out in the world, reaching out, exploring in ways that he no longer was doing.
But did that fascinate him? Was he interested in that?
He was very interested. There was a brief
period
period in the early days of our relationship when I was still straddling the line, in effect. I was in love with this man, and I was talking to him every night on the phone and writing to him and visiting him on the weekends.
And even at that time, you both
But I was also flying off to the Democratic National Convention, interviewing celebrities
and he was interested in that.
And he wanted to hear all about
Everything.
it. Everything. Every detail of the Democratic Convention. And I was, I think, to some degree, a little emissary into the world. I told he was fascinated to hear everything that I had to say about my life at Yale and the dormitory and my roommates and what I was doing. Then I left that to be with him, to do what he wanted, and of course I was no longer who he wanted, almost
Why?
by virtue of my... the same thing. I mean, it's what they say, about marriages that break up too. The same thing that you originally love about the person is the same thing that drives you crazy. I was so young. I was so...
So in the end, what drove him, what brought it to an end, was that what he liked about you, the fact that you were young, the fact that he thought you were innocent, all of that made him say, it is such a gulf because she's all that we don't belong together.
Well, and I was also, I can imagine that he must have, wondered, my God, what am I doing? I had signed a contract to write an autobiography in the wake of the publication of this first piece in the Times. So during all the months that I was living with Jerry Salinger, I was moving inexorably closer to the moment of publication of a book about me and a book tour, for goodness sake. And I very naively supposed that we could somehow weather this. I had utmost faith that I was going to spend my life with him, have children with him, live with him forever. But I was also publishing a book. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the moment when he finally, in a really rather devastating fashion, sent me away was about 2 weeks before the publication of that book.
Because he feared you going out talking about...
Oh, terribly, I think. And it's, the book is one of the reasons why I have no affection for that book is that I was in an excruciating position. I was writing a book about my life. I could hardly tell what was really going on about my life. In the 160 pages of my 18-year-old memoir, you will not find any mention of my having left Yale.
The central point of your life.
No, there's a page, the last page of my 19-year-old autobiography describes New Year's Day, 1973, and I'm writing the last pages of this book that I'm about to deliver. I never say that where I am sitting New Year's Day, 1973, is in the living room of J.D. Salinger. It's his birthday, his 54th birthday. We've just, I mentioned watching Guy Lombardo, and that's about the only clue that you can get that I'm not living a very typical 18-year-old's life, that I rang in the New Year watching Guy Lombardo.
Was the experience so powerful to be with Salinger that at every point you would look back now and say, I'm glad I went through it. I understand the pain that I've endured because of the way it ended. I understand what I had to do to recover, but simply it was worth it.
You know, I'm not a person, it's not my nature to indulge in regret and what might my life have been, I might have done. But I can't truthfully say, no, I'm glad I did that.
You can't?
No, I can't say that.
Because?
Because it was a deeply damaging experience.
How did it damage?
And I also would say of damaging experiences that they can, you know, they can crush you or you can become strengthened by them. And in this case, I think both were true. I was crushed and ultimately strengthened. I'm a different person for having that experience. Had I not met him, I might have gone down that path that he warned me against so severely, of becoming a shallow, trivial follower of whatever was in fashion at the moment, and not pursue more significant concerns. He, of course, had no respect for what I did choose to do with my life. I knew that, but I did not. I did not go the route that seemed more likely for me. Of, you know, I mean, becoming some magazine journalist writing gossipy profiles about celebrities. And
when he said it's over, what did he say?
We had gone on a vacation with his children to Florida, and his children were then 12 and 13 and 17, I guess, at that point. And we were sitting on a beach in Daytona Beach, Florida, looking out at the ocean. And he said, you know, I can never have any more children. I see that now. His children had taken a lot out of him in the few days before then. And he and I had always spoken of having children. That was a sort of a core part of the plan. And so he really knew what he was saying in saying that. And he said, I think you'd better go home now. Clear out, and I think it would be a good idea for you to clear out all your things before the children come back, meaning his children, so they won't be upset. So I got up off my beach towel and walked back to the hotel room. It's a period of hours that is very, very powerfully with me still. And I wasn't able to fly home that day because there was a snowstorm in New Hampshire, but I flew home the next day. He put me in a cab with a couple of $50 bills, and I went back to the empty house in Cornish and cleared out my things, and my mother came and picked me up and took me home, only it wasn't home anymore.
Before we leave Salinger, I mean, the passion he has for privacy is that he thinks that the system, in a sense, taints writers, and he doesn't want other people to judge his work.
He
and
said
all
that.
Of that.
He said that. I think another thing happens when you, you know, I think there are two things. There's privacy and there's secrecy. And I actually have a lot of respect for people who choose a private life. That's clearly not the choice that I've made.
Nor me either. No, I do have respect for people.
But I
who
do. I don't think that people who truly choose the private life send letters to 18-year-old girls if they're 54-year-old men seeking the private life. But then there's secrecy, and I think secrecy comes out of the sense of I've got to hide something, and I don't want to be discovered. You know, one of the reasons that I can publish a book like this one is I don't feel I don't feel that I have some horrible, I shouldn't say I'm not suggesting that anybody else does, but from my point of view, I don't have any shameful secrets. It's a good feeling. It's a good feeling to know there's nothing you can divulge about me right now on this show that's going to be some big shocker, because I've done it already.
You've exposed everything yourself.
Yes, I sort of have. And
writing the column,
I think it's interesting, and once again, it's sort of ironic, that the very fact that this man has made himself so removed, so inaccessible, has not provided any word or access to what he has to say, which people were hungry for, have been hungry for all these years, gives a perhaps disproportionate attention to my words now.
Of course it does. Of course it does.
Somebody like Norman Mailer has been telling for years what he's been up to.
Of course it does. I mean, it's just obvious. My question is, what is he trying to hide?
Well, that's not for me to say. That's probably not for me to say.
Do you know?
Do I know? No, I do not inhabit the brain of Jerry Salinger.
But you spent time. You slept in his bed. Come on. You've got to know, if you spend that time, what people's demons are, what their fears are, what their embarrassments are, what their hopes are, what their dreams are, what they care about, how they see the connections between things. Either by word or deed.
I think I saw him go into a room to write every day. He said he had written 2 books. I never saw a word of them. I don't know what those books were. But I do believe that that to write without an audience is, I don't know what that means as a person who has written for readers. To write without readers, to write for nobody all these years is an inconceivable act to me. Writing is about communication.
So he's not writing?
I don't know.
That's what you're suggesting. That's what you feel.
I know he's writing letters. I know there are letters.
But you do not know that he's writing novels?
No.
You don't know that there's a novel, when he dies, there's going to be the discovery of 5 brilliant novels?
I won't say there won't be, but I couldn't vouch that there will.
He never wanted to show you anything like that he had written and said,
no,
this is what my life has been about.
He showed me,
Here it
he
is.
had a kind of archive of the Glass family, the family that he writes about, of course, and a family that seemed to be as real to him as any human members of it.
Is he hiding the fear of failure?
Oh, I'm just not going to go there, Charlie. I'm just not going to ultimately pass that kind of judgment.
Or insight.
I hope that a person who reads this book feels able to make a few informed guesses for himself.
Do you feel something's been lifted from you because you've been able to do this and because you have been able to?
Enormously. I have to add that that's not reason enough to, for anybody else to, I mean, if all this book was a piece of therapy, then it should have stayed in my journal.
Yes.
So that was not my ultimate goal. My ultimate goal always is reaching a reader, communicating with a reader, telling a story, and a story that I actually believe can be helpful to some people. But yes, enormously. For 25 years, I have been carrying secrets and writing around. What I've been doing these many years has been trying to tell the story of a woman's life, mine. I've done other things. I've written novels.
Columns and all that.
But that has been my ongoing pursuit. But there was this huge piece in the middle that I had to walk around, like the old, elephant in the living room in an alcoholic family, that I could never include in this story. And there was also this fear of the wrath of J.D. Salinger, if I ever spoke of him. And finally what I did, and it really was an act that I had not premeditated at all, but I found myself, once I embarked on revisiting this piece of my history, I realized that I had to see him again. I went to see him last fall on the eve of my 44th birthday, and that probably more than any experience that I could name in recent times, maybe in any times, was transformed the way my life looked, the way the world looked to me.
How so?
You know, the last time I had seen Jerry Salinger, I had been a 19-year-old girl, and he had pointed a finger at me and looked me in the eye and told me I was unworthy. He had contempt for me, for who I was, for what I did. At 44, if somebody tells me those sorts of things, I might say, well, who are you? And think less of the person for telling me that. But when you hear that at 19, you think less of yourself. So I needed to see him as a 44-year-old woman, and I did. I drove to his house on this bleak November day. It was a pretty dramatic scene, I have to say, and knocked at the door. His wife was in the kitchen. She called out, "What do you want?" I said, I've come to see Jerry. Would you tell him Joyce Maynard is here? And she disappeared into a back room for a long time she was gone. He didn't have to come to the door. I was hardly going to break it down, but I knew he would come. And he did. And when he emerged, it's a story I tell more fully than I'm going to tell here in my book, I looked into a face of more rage and anger and bitterness than I have ever beheld. And I wasn't afraid. It was a great thing, of course. It was a great thing to be able to stand on his doorstep and see him with adult eyes and speak to him as an adult woman.
Fear was gone.
It was. It was.
There's much more in this book. Joyce Maynard, a memoir, At Home in the World. Thank you very, very much.
Oh, pleasure to be here.
Thank you for joining us. See you next time.